We're going to talk about how to streamline your no-code apps development and testing prior to launch by creating a framework that takes absolutely no technical skills or background whatsoever. Now, make sure you stick around until the end because I also have a template that goes along with this that you're going to be able to download and use with your own app. And this is kind of like a simplified version of one of the steps our own clients go through. So stick around to the end for that. I'm Kristen, co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps. We help non-technical entrepreneurs build custom apps so they can start their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses all without coding. We release a new video on no-code apps every single week, so subscribe to this channel if you want more information on that. Your pilot app is a version of your app that you're going to be launching in order to validate your product. That's the goal, product validation. And today we're going to talk about how to start doing a little pilot prep right now. And that's going to involve a process called top-down testing that we go through with our own clients. And it's essentially going to create a really simple and straightforward framework to help guide both your development with your app's architecture and its features, as well as your testing prior to actually bringing users on board. And this is going to help ensure a seamless experience for them once they do start using your app. Before we get too far into this, I want to make sure you know when to start thinking about creating a framework like this. So on the screen here, you see 3 points in a process line, really. We have strategy, structure, and systems. Now, at the top of this, what you're aiming for is scale. Okay, so these are the stages you're going to go through with your app. Now, strategy is when you are planning out your development and your launch. You are scoping your app strategically and making sure that once you actually start development, you can move through it as seamlessly and quickly as possible. Now, structure is when you create the framework of your app. So things like the database structure or the overall app architecture, the page navigation. So the framework of your app. Systems is when you start putting functionality and logic into place. This is when you start building out your custom features of your app. And then scale is not necessarily when you are actually scaling your app. Now it is, because scale is sort of ongoing, but it also includes things prior to actually being able to scale. So having best practices in place for testing, having best practices in place once your users come on board, having assets in place to help you start building out a team. So this is kind of like the journey you'll go through as an app developer. Now, we've already talked about strategy in another video, and we have a template that can help you through this strategy step as well. Now, I'll link to that video up above. It's called The Perfect Pilot, so you'll want to head there if you haven't gone through the strategy stage yet and scoped out your app. But if you have, then you're going to be moving into structure and systems. Now, the framework that we're going to be talking about today, it applies to this entire section right here, and actually goes a little bit further beyond systems. So we're going to be creating a really simple and straightforward framework that's going to help you structure your app, the overall app architecture. It's going to help you move through the systems. In other words, creating your app's logic, the workflows, the functionality. It's going to help you move through that in a more structured way, and it's going to help instill best practices that will enable you to scale later on once you are starting to wrap up your development. So that should give you a full picture view of where we're at with this. One of the biggest bottlenecks to actually launching your app is having haphazard and unstructured development. Now, when you've scoped out the first version of your app, your pilot app, and you have what we call your must-have features already defined, a lot of people go from that, having their feature list, straight into their development, and they kind of just start building whatever they can kind of figure out how to build first. And that's how they structure or order their development. They just build what they know how to build, and then they kind of go and figure out how to build other things. And it's a little haphazard. Now, the development happening like that creates an unclean development workspace, which in and of itself is unscalable, but it can also create a really buggy app. And this is another big bottleneck that holds a lot of people back from launching. One is that they don't realize that testing is such a big project in and of itself. And so when they approach testing just sort of in a haphazard way and just test without any structure, it can create a lot of issues. One, there are going to be a lot of issues when you go to test it. That's just the nature of development. But when you don't have a structure to your testing process itself, then you're going to have a hard time fixing any issues, and you're going to have an even harder time making sure users are able to have a good experience once they come on board your app. Because your testing shouldn't just be about testing for bugs and issues. It should be that. So you should be testing from a developer's point of view. You should also be testing from a user's point of view and going through the flows and navigation and making sure that from a functionality standpoint, a user can actually achieve the goals that your app is aimed at helping them achieve. The big bottlenecks here are haphazard development and haphazard, just kind of scattered and unstructured testing. And so the framework that we're going to go through today is going to help you clean up both of those things. Now, the key here is simplification, because development, launching an app, testing an app, all of those things can get really overcomplicated really, really quickly. And I have no doubt you've already felt that. And so this is going to simplify. So if it seems oversimplified, that is intentional, and I encourage you to embrace that. On my screen here, I have a template, and you're going to be able to download this as well. And we're going to go through a couple of the top sections so that you can get started on it once you have downloaded your own copy. So remember, I said the first thing that you would go through is a scoping process, and there's a link down in the description below to take you to that other training and that other template. It's called the Perfect Pilot, and that will help you determine your must-have features with your app. So these are the features that must be in place in order for a user to solve the problem that your app is intended to help them solve. Now, we're starting simple here. This is a pilot app, and so there are only 4 sections for must-have features. So that's intentional. Make sure that you don't come into this with 5, 6, 7 features, because that is no longer a pilot app. That is verging on full scope plus app, and we don't want that for our first launch. So you're going to put your must-have features up here, and then we're going to break down must-have features into really granular detail, because one of the things that creates that haphazard development we talked about is not defining the sub-features and the tertiary features, really the user flows or the user stories, which we're going to talk about. Because you can have a must-have feature, let's say it's a booking feature, but there are infinite possibilities of how that booking feature could work, and those infinite possibilities will define all of your sub features and all of the tertiary features and all of the flows and little nuances that are involved in those features. So it's important that you define these before you start your development. Now, you can't do this with 100% clarity, but you do want to create as much definition of these features prior to development as you can, because if you wait until you get into development, you will inevitably expand your scope and go beyond what a pilot app should be. It just will happen, I guarantee it. So you want to get crystal clear early on. So the next section is where you're going to define your user stories, and you're going to define a set of user stories for each must-have feature that is included in your pilot app's scope. User stories are really simple. These are just really descriptors of how a user will interact with your features. So if a user does this, then this will happen. And you're going to go through each of your must-have features, those overarching features, and define its own set of user stories. A really easy example of this is with user onboarding. So let's say we are creating user stories for our user onboarding functionality within the app. Well, we would want to define that as every action a user must take and every result of that action in order to start the user onboarding process and then finalize the user onboarding process. So for example, if I'm on the app's landing page and I click register, a pop-up opens. If I input my name and my email within that pop-up, then a register button is enabled. When I click register, a new user is created in the app's database. When a new user is created, that new user is directed to their user dashboard. So from initially registering to landing on their individual user dashboard, we can define the user stories or the steps and actions that are involved within that feature or functionality. User onboarding is just a really simple example. Everyone is going to have user onboarding, but you're going to have a different set of features with more nuanced processes. And so you're going to want to go through each one of your must-have features and define those user stories. Going back to our pilot prep template, this is really simple. If a user X, you're going to enter the information here, the action that's being taken, then what is the outcome? That's what you're going to put here. What is the result or the outcome of the action that was taken? And you're going to go from start all the way to finish with your user stories. You can, of course, add in more steps here if you need to. There's a little more info for you down at the bottom of that template, but we're just going to go through the initial part now to help you get started and so you can understand how to use it. How is this going to help you in both development and your testing, your launch, and your scale phases? Because with such a simple process, it can be easy to overlook the impact that it can have throughout your entire app development journey. Now, with your development, this is really important. Again, that haphazard and kind of scattered development is one of the biggest problems I see. I mean, let's not even talk about using the tools, like understanding how to use the tools or anything like that, but just having a structure to your development, that alone can be the make or break thing that decides whether or not you launch your app. So let's say you have those must-have features defined. So you have your scope. That's great as long as you have that structure. So with a framework like this, what you are essentially doing is you're taking every single one of your must-have features and you are defining those secondary features that we talked about, because there's always going to be sub-features within your must-have features. So you're defining these sub-features, and within each of those, you are essentially then defining the, what we'll call tertiary features. So every single sub-feature is also going to have these little tertiary features. And these can be simple. I mean, these can just be little nuances in how you want this functionality specifically to work for your user. But they all need to be defined so that you can actually build them and build them efficiently and in the correct logical order. And so with your development, when you have a breakdown of user stories, every single action and outcome that needs to happen within your app in order for a user to go from start to finish, you're essentially creating your entire development roadmap, like a checklist for development. I mean, think about how simple that is, but also think about how valuable that is. That is such an incredibly helpful thing. So I encourage you to use it for that. What's really cool about having something like that is when you come over into this testing and the section where you kind of start to scale your app or switch things into growth mode, you now have a testing framework where you can essentially guide your entire user testing. So remember, we talked about testing as being multifaceted. So you're going to be testing from a developer's point of view, and you're going to be testing from a user's point of view. So as a developer, you need to go through and fix all your errors, your issues, make sure the bugs are taken care of and that things work. But then you need to go through and test as a user. Can you navigate the app from start to finish and achieve all of the goals, the sub goals, or those actions and outcomes that you want a user to be able to go through? Now, the best way to test that is to follow a framework for your testing where you have every single user story that should exist. You have each user story defined of the actions and the outcomes that should happen. And you can just essentially use that to guide your testing and make sure that, yes, in fact, when this action is taken, this is the outcome that occurs. And if it's not, then you can fix it. It is the easiest way to structure your testing, which can honestly feel like a second project outside of your development altogether. So that kind of covers our testing benefits with this, but then we move into that initial growth phase, the scale stage and ongoing stage with your app. And what you're going to start doing is building a team, probably. Now, some people are looking to scale their app as big as they possibly can, and if that's the case, then at some point you are going to have to build a team. Some people are wanting to scale their app, maybe not to be as big as they possibly can be, but they're still going to want, maybe another person on their team or somebody else who is helping them. Now, hiring and building a team is an entirely different thing from building an app. So if you have never built and launched an app before, which most people haven't, then you're going to be learning a lot of things. You're going to be learning how to develop an app. You're going to be learning how to test an app. You're going to be learning how to launch an app and how to convert users and do sales and marketing and all of these things. You're going to be wearing a lot of hats in the beginning. And until you have a team, you're also going to be learning how to start to build that team. That in and of itself is going to involve a lot of trial and error for you. But there's one thing that is going to make building your team vastly easier, and that is having documentation for your app. So you've probably heard of or used or created SOPs, standard operating procedures of your own, and you know how important they are to business operations running smoothly. Well, you are going to have to create documentation for your app in order to build a team, especially if you're going to be bringing junior developers in-house, which most people probably are, because most founders are going to want to eventually shift their focus towards growth, and they're going to be more valuable in marketing and sales and partnerships. And so you're going to be bringing on maybe a very part-time junior developer initially, just for general maintenance, bug fixing, intaking user feedback, and over time that is going to grow, again, if your goal is to scale. Now, having documentation that identifies every single user story within your app and every single action that needs to be taken and every single outcome that needs to happen, that type of thing is invaluable when you are building your team. It is going to reduce the amount of time spent with you onboarding someone onto your team and into your app significantly. And this is something that, as a byproduct, the benefit of this being a byproduct of streamlining your development and streamlining your testing, that in and of itself is so valuable if your goal is to scale. That alone is reason to go through this process. Okay, so when it comes to your team, we are thinking about onboarding. Now, I don't normally like to pre-plan too far in advance, And so I'm not telling you that you need to be structuring your team's onboarding right now, but I am telling you that you have a template or you have access to a template that is so easy and that is going to simplify your development and your testing so much. It is also going to help you when you get to that next step. So you don't need to get tied up in that yet, but know that this is an important part of setting you up for that when the time comes. To grab a copy of this template that you can use for your own app, you can head to the link in the description down below. It's over at coachingnocodeapps.com/pilot-prep. Pilot prep. So coachingnocodeapps.com/pilot-prep. And hey, if you find this video and that template to be helpful for you, if you could give this video a like, we would really appreciate it. It helps us get our videos out to more people who we can help on their own journeys to launching and growing their apps and their businesses. So give this video a like, grab a copy of your template, and dive into your app's development and launch and growth from there.